Minister Miller, would you like to begin?
Yes, is everyone ready?
Yep, we're all ready to go.
Okay. Good afternoon et bonjour. Je tiens à reconnaître que je me trouve
I would like to
présentement sur le
recognize that I
territoire
am currently
traditionnel
on
du
the
peuple
traditional
algonquin.
territory of the
Merci à
Algonquin
tous de vous
people.
joindre à nous.
Thank you,
Avec moi
all of you
aujourd'hui
for
sont mes
joining us.
collègues et
Today
ministres
are
Annie Tananan,
with me
Diane
today are my
Leboutier,
colleagues and
Omar
ministers
Agabra
Annie
et
Danan,
Joyce
Diane
Murray.
Leboutier,
Nous
Omar Agabra,
répondrons
and Joyce Murray.
au
We are
rapport d'audit
responding to the
performance de la
Auditor General's
vérificatrice
performance
générale
report
déposée plus tôt en
tabled
Chambre
earlier
des
in the House
communes
of Commons
aujourd'hui.
today.
Je débuterai
I
par
will begin
répondre
by
au rapport sur
responding to what the
l'accès à une eau
report
potable
says
salubre dans
on
les
access
collectivités des
to
Premières
clean
Nations.
drinking water in First
Nous accueillons
Nations. We
favorablement, bien
favorably
évidemment, les
welcome
recommandations
the
du rapport de la
auditor's
vérificatrice.
recommendations.
Permettez-moi de vous assurer
Let
que
me
nous
assure
partageons leur
you
engagement
that we
continuerons de
share
travailler
the
sans relâche
commitment,
jusqu'à ce
and
que
we are
tous les avis à
continuing to
long terme dans
work
les Premières Nations
tirelessly
sur réserve
until
soient levés.
all.
Since 2015, we've worked in partnership with First Nations leadership and communities to improve access to clean drinking water. Despite the challenges, we're confident that we're on the right path. Let's consider the progress that's been made in the last few years. In November 2015, when we came into power, there were 105 long-term drinking water advisories on public systems on reserves across the country in effect. To date, 99 have been lifted. Each community has its own set of challenges, and from the beginning, we've worked directly with community leaders to identify and formulate the best path forward in each case. During Budget 2016, we allocated $1.8 billion to improve First Nations access to clean water. Between November 2015 and February 2018, over 50 long-term water advisories were lifted on public water systems. Budget 2018 provided an additional $172.6 million over 3 years to help with this work. During the fall economic statement of last fall, we announced an additional $1.5 billion to accelerate the work to lift all long-term drinking water advisories on reserve, bringing the total investments to over $3.5 billion since 2016. Part of this money will also provide reliable and lasting funding to help prevent future long-term drinking water advisories by making it easier for problems to be caught early on. Long-term funding will cover 100% of operations and maintenance costs for water and wastewater infrastructure on reserves based on the funding formula, an area that will improve sustainability of the systems, improve water operator salaries, and improve operator supports, and transform the way in which we approach water in First Nations. That brings us to today. We're one shy of celebrating the 100th long-term drinking water advisory lift. Additionally, together we've been able to prevent over 175 short-term water advisories from becoming long-term issues. We can't deny the loss of a construction season due to COVID. However, I can confirm that there are project plans in place and underway to resolve all 57 remaining advisories, which affect 39 communities. Nous devons continuer de répondre aux besoins et priorités des
We
communautés
must
sur le long
continue to
terme
respond
et
to
de le
the
faire
needs
au-delà
and
de
priorities
2021
of the
dans
communities
les
in the
années à
long
suivre.
term and to do
Nous
so
pouvons
beyond
tous être fiers du travail
2021,
accompli
beyond
par
the
les
next
communautés des
5 or
Premières
10
Nations
years.
et
We
nous
can be
sommes
proud of the
déterminés
work that we've
à
done
continuer
with
d'améliorer
work
l'accès
done
à
by
l'eau
the First
potable
Nations
à long
communities, and
terme.
we are determined to continue
Merci,
to improve access to drinking water
and
in the
thank you.
long term.
Thank you, Minister Anand.
Merci beaucoup. Good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde.
Welcome,
I would
everyone.
like to begin by thanking the Auditor General and her office for this important and timely report. The National Shipbuilding Strategy is Canada's long-term plan to renew the fleets of the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Coast Guard. The NSS strives to deliver vessels to the RCN and the CCG in a timely and affordable manner to create sustainable marine industry and generate economic growth for Canada. As the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, I and my department are responsible for the overall program management of the National Shipbuilding Strategy, and we welcome the Auditor General's findings and accept all of her recommendations. La vérificatrice générale fait remarquer que la construction navale est complexe
The
et
Auditor
que,
General
durant la
emphasized
période visée
that
par la vérification,
shipbuilding
le
is
gouvernement
a
a pris
complex issue, and
d'importantes
during the
décisions
audit
pour
period,
tracer la
the
stratégie
government made
nationale de
important
construction
decisions
navale sur
to
une
ensure that
voie
the national
viable.
shipbuilding
The strategy is a
strategy
long-term plan
take on
to
a new
renew our
tack.
federal fleets, and we are seeing results. In July 2020, Irving Shipbuilding delivered the first of 6 new Arctic and offshore patrol ships to the Royal Canadian Navy, making it the first large ship to be built for the Navy under the NSS. In October 2020, Seaspan Vancouver Shipyards delivered the third and final offshore fisheries science vessel, the Canadian Coast Guard ship called the John Cabot, marking the delivery of the first full class of large vessels built under the NSS. Chantier Davy a achevé récemment la
Davies
conversion du
Shipbuilding
deuxième bricolage
recently
provisoire
finished
moyen, le
the
NGCC Jean Goodwill,
the
et
Jean
l'a
Goodwill
livré à la garde
Canadian
côtière
Coast Guard
canadienne. These are only
vessel.
some of the recent accomplishments of the NSS. Work is underway across the country, and national shipbuilding strategy contracts have contributed an estimated $20 billion to the Canadian economy and supported nearly 17,000 jobs. We have made much progress, but the program has not been without its challenges. In the early days, plans and projections were not yet informed by actual build experience at the shipyards, and expertise in Canada was still developing. Entirely new classes of ships were built by new workforces and new shipyards. Mais au fil de l'évolution de la stratégie nationale de construction
But as the
navale,
national
les chantiers
shipbuilding
navals
strategy
et le Canada
evolved,
ont acquis
Canada and
l'expérience.
the shipbuilding
Aujourd'hui, nous avons une bien meilleure compréhension,
sites
fondée
acquired
sur des
experience.
données
We now
probantes
have a better
du temps,
understanding
des
of the
efforts et des
issues
dépenses
based
d'appliquer
on
la construction de
sound
navires de
data,
calibre mondial.
and we are able
We
to build
appreciate the
world-class
OAG
ships.
report and agree that having complete and reliable schedules is essential for decision making. We also agree that improving risk management tools is essential, and we continue to work with our partners to closely manage the shipbuilding process and to strengthen the overall strategy. For example, we are applying the lessons learned from the original shipyard selection to the process to select a third shipyard. In short, we thank the Auditor General for her recommendations. We are committed to addressing them so that the strategy continues to deliver important benefits for Canadians. Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Megwaj.
Merci beaucoup. Ministre Leboutillier, la parole est à vous.
Thank you very much. Minister Leboutier,
Merci.
you have the floor.
Bonjour. Hello,
Hello.
everyone. L'allocation canadienne pour enfants,
The
soit
Canada
l'ACE,
Child Benefit, or
est
the
une prestation
CCB,
mensuelle non
is a
imposable
tax-free
versée aux
benefit
familles
paid
admissibles
monthly
pour
to
aider à
eligible
subvenir aux
families
besoins de
to
leurs
help them
enfants de
meet the
moins de
needs of their
18 ans.
children under the
Cette
age of
prestation
18.
vient en aide à
This
plus de
benefit
3,3
provides
millions
assistance
de
to more
familles
than
canadiennes
3.3 million
chaque année.
Canadian families
Dans
every
son
year.
rapport, le Bureau
In
du
her
vérificateur
report, the
général
Office of the
du
Auditor
Canada
General of
reconnaît que
Canada
l'agence a
recognizes
su
that the
gérer
Canada Revenue
efficacement le
Agency
programme
has
de
effectively
l'ACE, en
managed the
plus de veiller
CCB
à ce que les
program,
paiements
in addition to
exacts et
ensuring that
opportuns
the correct
soient
amounts
versés
are
à ces
paid on
millions de
time
familles
to these
admissibles.
millions of eligible
Bien que les
families.
constatations de la
Although the audit
vérification
findings
soient
are
généralement
generally
positives,
positive,
le
the
rapport a
report did
cerné deux
identify
possibilités
two areas
d'amélioration.
for improvement.
Premièrement,
First,
le rapport
the
a
report
recommandé
recommended
d'améliorer les
improving the
documents à la
documents made
disposition des
available
demandeurs
to
et les
applicants
données,
and the
les données
data
recueillies par ceux-ci.
collected
Deuxièmement,
with them.
il a
And
recommandé d'aider
second,
à
it recommends
clarifier la
helping
confusion au
clearing
sujet
up the
du
confusion
concept de
over the
présomption en
concept of
faveur
presumption in
du
favor
parent
of
de
the
sexe
female
féminin.
parent,
Une
which is a legal
identification juridique pour la
identification
garde d'un
used for
enfant
child
en vertu de
custody
la loi de
under
l'impôt
the
sur le
Income
revenu.
Tax Act.
L'agence a accepté les
The agency
recommandations,
has accepted the
lesquelles cadrent
recommendations,
avec notre
which are in
philosophie
keeping with
des
our
gens
people
d'abord.
first
Cette
philosophy.
philosophie nous
This
motive à
philosophy
inviter les
motivates
Canadiens
us to
à
listen
changer
to
notre façon de
Canadians, to
travailler
change
et
our
à
way of
améliorer
working,
nos
and to
services
use
en
Canadians'
fonction valeur
to
rétroactive.
improve our
Cela
services.
nous motive
It also
également à
motivates
mettre en
us to
place des mesures
implement
visant
measures
à
that will
améliorer
improve
l'administration du
the
programme de l'ACE,
Canadian
y
child,
compris
how we
l'amélioration des
administer rather the
messages
Canadian
sur notre
child
site
benefit,
web et
and
dans
that
nos guides
includes
et
the
formulaires,
messaging on
ainsi
our
qu'offrir
website and in our
plus de
guides and
formation
forums,
à
as
ceux
well as
qui
offering
évaluent les
additional
demandes.
training to
Par
application
ailleurs,
assessors.
je peux vous assurer
Moreover,
que
I can
l'agence
assure you
demeure
that the
déterminée
agency
à
remains
protéger
determined
et à
to
assurer
protect and ensure
l'équité
the
et
integrity
l'intégrité
and
du régime
fairness
fiscal
of
du
Canada's
Canada
tax
pour
regime
tous les
for all
Canadiens et
Canadians.
Canadiennes. Et les particuliers peuvent être
Individuals
assurés
can
que
rest
l'agence
assured
continue
that the
d'examiner les
agency is
procédures et
continuing
les
to
outils de
review the
communication
procedures and
pour
communication
aider tous les
tools
Canadiens
to
et
help
Canadiennes
eligible
admissibles
Canadians
à comprendre les
understand
étapes à
how
suivre
to apply
pour
for
demander
and
et
receive
recevoir
the Canada
l'allocation
Child
canadienne pour enfants.
Benefit.
Merci
Thank
beaucoup.
you.
Bon après-midi.
Merci beaucoup. Now, Minister Alghabra, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour. As Minister of Transport, the safety and security of passengers and of the rail transportation system remains my top priority. I'm pleased today to welcome the Auditor General's follow-up audit of Transport Canada's oversight of rail safety. This report focuses on select elements of the Auditor General's 2013 audit. Since the 2013 audit, Transport Canada has taken action to apply all of the report's recommendations to strengthen oversight and improve compliance and enforcement activity. Transport Canada monitors federal railway companies for compliance with rules, regulations, and standards under the Railway Safety Act. We do this by auditing risks and conducting safety inspections. On average, we conduct more than 35,000 yearly inspections and audits on grade crossings, railway tracks, equipment, and operations. In addition, in the last year alone, we have put in place several measures, including regulations requiring rail operators to install video and voice recorders in locomotives, approving new rules to better manage rail worker fatigue, and ordering the industry to improve employees' safety in yard operations. We have also instructed the rail industry to improve how they maintain and inspect their tracks and have placed speed restrictions on trains carrying large amount of dangerous goods. Transport Canada acknowledges the findings of this report, and we are committed to the continuous improvement of our rail safety program. We are already working to address all of the Auditor General's recommendations to further improve the effectiveness of our safety oversight. Among other measures, we will launch consultations on strengthening safety management systems. We will also be looking for ways to better measure and improve our oversight program. Canada's railway network is the longest in the world and the 5th busiest when it comes to volume of goods. It's equally important to note that Canada's rail transportation system is one of the safest in the world. This is a result of shared efforts between our government and partners, including other levels of government, railway companies, communities, and industry partners. I want to assure you that rail safety is my top priority, and my department is continuously looking for ways to make our railway system even safer for Canadians. I'm grateful for the Auditor General's report and confident that it will help guide our ongoing efforts. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Minister Murray.
Hello, thank you for joining us here today, and I'm pleased to respond to the report on procuring complex IT solutions. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from my home in Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. As Minister of Digital Government, I'm leading a generational investment to update and replace outdated government IT systems and to modernize how the government delivers services to all Canadians. lorsqu'il s'agit de l'approvisionnement en technologie de l'information pour
When it
le
comes to
gouvernement du
procurement of
Canada, nous
IT
nous
equipment
engageons
for
à
Canada,
adopter les
we
pratiques
make the
d'approvisionnement
commitment
ouvertes,
to
équitables
hold
et
open,
concurrentielles et à tirer les
fair,
leçons
and
des
competitive
erreurs du
bidding
passé.
processes.
A critical component of modernizing our IT is to work in new ways and build these systems with modern, agile procurement principles. And I'd like to thank the Auditor General for her report and for her acknowledgement that we've already made progress in this area. We know that we have more to do. We agree with and accept her recommendations. They will further support our efforts to bring increased governance and fairness to our procurement processes and to make them even more open and transparent. And I aim to keep honestly assessing whether our processes are working. The Secrétariat du Conseil de Trésor, Service
The
Public
Treasury Board,
Approvisionnement Canada
Secretary,
et Services Partagés
Public Service
ont
and Procurement
travaillé
Canada,
en
and Shared
étroite
Services
collaboration
Canada
pour
worked
favoriser
very
une prise de
closely
conscience commune
to
de
promote a
l'approvisionnement
conscious collective
notamment en
awareness,
ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre d'initiatives de
especially of the
transformation et des
implementation of
technologies de l'information.
transportation IT
Shared
initiatives.
services and PSPC have already created centers of expertise and agile procurement to develop guidance and support for procurement officers. This is a first step that we will build on as we implement the advice from this report. In following the Auditor General's recommendation, the Government of Canada will also develop more comprehensive guidance and training for employees to improve understanding of agile procurement and how to work in the open and collaboratively. We will implement more effective processes to ensure that stakeholder organizations are properly consulted on complex IT procurements, and will openly engage with vendors and other organizations to hear any concerns they may have and improve our information management practices to ensure more fairness and transparency. Although agile procurement is still a relatively new approach in government, I'm confident in our ability to take full advantage of this approach. Il me fera maintenant plaisir de répondre à vos questions en mon nom
I will
et
be
au nom
delighted
de
to
mes
answer
collègues dont les
your
services sont
questions in my
mentionnés
own name
dans
and
ce
on
rapport.
behalf of all my
Merci.
colleagues
Thank you.
whose services have been mentioned in this report.
Thank you, Minister Murray. We'll now take questions from journalists. One question, one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des journalistes, une question et une question de suivi. Opérateur, première question, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press star 1 on your device's keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing star 2. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur les touches étoile 2. The first question is from, la première question est de Dylan Robertson from Winnipeg Free Press. Please go ahead, à vous la parole.
Hi, Minister Miller. Manitoba Chiefs today are calling for an inquiry and the scrapping of the value for money part of the tendering protocol that ISC uses for capital projects. They say that ISC has compelled them to go with the cheapest contractors, which often ends up being costlier in the long run when issues emerge. I'm wondering if you're looking at suspending this part of the procurement protocol.
Well, thank you for the question, Dylan. And first, there's been a bit of a conflated proposition with the contention that this is about the lowest bidder. There is a value for money proposition in any procurement process that follows best industry practices, but this isn't about going with the cheap option. It's going with the option that suits the First Nations. And over the course of my tenure as minister for the last 15 months, my team and I have been looking into what are those practices? What is the tendering practice? This is open on our website for everyone to consult. But people shouldn't think that we necessarily, or First Nations necessarily have to go with the lowest bidder. Certainly, Over the last little while, I will concede that I've heard some alarming stories. For example, as everyone heard, in and around Nescandiga, and I'm very much open to re-examining not only the policy, but how it's put in effect in regions and through the department. This is a little more complex than simply rolling it up into saying we go with the lowest bidder. Sometimes, because of infrastructure pressure, we're faced with only one tender, and it's something we have to look at. But it's always done in partnership with First Nations, in addition to the priorities that they are identifying to me. I haven't heard that directly from them yet, so I will wait to see and get it from them. But absolutely, we're willing to work with them.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask how much faith you have in your department's categorization of long-term advisories. The auditors today found the community had 31 separate short-term advisories over the course of 5 years, but it never registered as being a long-term advisory, so it wasn't prioritized for fixing. The government's promises hinges on these long-term advisories, but it seems like the goalposts don't necessarily reflect the situation on the ground. I'm wondering if you're going to ask the department to change its definition of long-term advisories or reassess if communities should be under that label.
How we categorize long-term water advisories and lifts as well varies a little bit from how the Auditor General does it. And you can look into decommissioning as well as part of that. We currently, as the data point, have 39 communities representing a little over 57 water advisories that are on a long-term status. We're looking to lift a number of those. At the end of the day, what we want to see is clean water going into communities, however that's categorized, and that's the goal of this department. So always willing to perfect things and align with how the Auditor General categorizes things, but certainly I'm glad to look into something like that.
Thanks, Dylan. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from La prochaine question est de Libertion de Canadian Press. Please go ahead. Vous la parole.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask Minister Anand about the shipbuilding strategy. The last few weeks we've seen a variety of different reports on this strategy. We've seen $1 billion that the government's going to pay for the offshore oceanographic science vessel. We've got the PBO report, another $17 billion for the CSC. We've got delays. We've got all kinds of problems. How can Canadians have any confidence in this strategy? And how can you reassure them that you are getting the strategy on track as we continue to see more cost overruns and endless delays?
Okay, thank you so much, Lee, for the question. I'm sorry we can't have this conversation in person, but I wanted
Minister Anand, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, je m'excuse. I want to take you back to 2012 and the origins of the shipbuilding strategy that was put in place by the government of the day. And the idea was, and continues to be, that it is a long-term strategy to renew the fleets of the RCN and the CCG. And the primary purpose, as I'm sure you know, is to ensure that these vessels are delivered in a timely and affordable manner while creating a sustainable marine industry and generating economic growth for Canada. So on that score, in terms of generating economic growth needed under the NSS, with the addition of $20 billion to the Canadian economy, the NSS has shown some success. At the same time, it is clear that there are lessons to be learned, and that over time, this very complex process of shipbuilding, which clearly needs to improve, as the Auditor General herself says, is and warrants some improvement. And that is what we are taking from the Auditor General's report today. There are areas of improvement: risk management strategies, delivery schedules, for example, But by the same token, some of the advantages of this strategy are clear and present, and we need to continue to improve it. Thank you.
With a follow-up, how much of a mistake was it to try to accomplish three objectives with this strategy? Renewing the fleet, creating a sustainable marine industry, which this report seems to suggest Seaspan almost went under, and economic benefits. How much of those three competing priorities have contributed to the many problems that we're seeing with this plan right now?
Well, I want to be clear that I am of the view that the shipbuilding strategy has been by and large successful, and that improvements in the strategy continue to need to be made. I also want to emphasize how complex and challenging the strategy is, and we will continue to work to improve that strategy on the ground. I don't think that it is a mistake when you see the contributions to the Canadian economy, the $20 billion to the economy, the 17,000 jobs to the economy, and the actual vessels that have been produced. Since the launch of the strategy itself, 4 large ships have been delivered and several small vessels are being built. In addition, the number of repair, refit, and maintenance projects that are underway across the country continues to increase. We are in the process of reviewing the Davie shipyard as the third potential shipyard in this strategy, and we are going to continue to work closely with the shipyard partners to deliver ships as soon as possible in a way that benefits all Canadians, including the Canadian economy and the Coast Guard as well as the Navy. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Alexis Riopel de Le Devoir.
Alexis Riopel, Le Devoir. Question.
Oui, bonjour. La question est pour le ministre Miller.
My question is for Minister Miller.
L'engagement du gouvernement à
The government's
résoudre les
commitment
problèmes d'eau potable dans les communautés autochtones date de
to reduce
2015.
boil water
Dans le rapport de
advisories
vérificatrice
in
générale
Indigenous
d'aujourd'hui,
communities made in
dit que le gouvernement devait
2015.
s'attaquer en priorité à changer la formule d'allocation des fonds pour le
Well,
financement du fonctionnement
the
et
Auditor General's
l'entretien des
report says
systèmes.
the formula funding,
Je me demandais
a funding
pourquoi ça
formula
n'avait pas
rather,
été
should
fait
be
avant,
changed as a
pourquoi ça n'avait pas
priority.
été
I'm wondering why that
prévu dans
wasn't
les
done ahead of
dernières
time
années,
in recent
et déjà mis en
years.
place à l'heure actuelle.
Inaudible. Answer.
Eh bien, merci pour la question
Thank you for
fort
the question,
pertinente.
a very relevant
Écoutez,
one.
depuis 2015, on s'est
Since
fixé, comme vous l'avez
2015,
dit, l'objectif de
we set
lever dans le
the
temps les 105 avis
target
qui étaient
of lifting the
qui étaient présents.
105 boil water
Et
advisories
l'emphase était
in
mise
First
sur
Nations. Emphasis was
l'infrastructure
placed
et
on
d'avoir un engagement
infrastructure
approprié avec les communautés pour
and
s'assurer que
making
ces
a
communautés
commitment
puissent
with the
lever
communities so that
leurs
they
avis
could
d'évolution à long terme.
lift
Quand
these
j'ai
boil water
pris mes fonctions,
advisories for the long
quand je suis
term.
entré en fonction en
When I
novembre
assumed the position
2019, il y a donc
of
15 mois,
minister
je me suis rassemblé
15
avec
months
l'équipe
ago,
bien
I
avant la
sat
COVID
down
pour
with the
dire
team. That was
est-ce qu'on fait les
before
choses de
COVID.
la bonne
I
façon?
sat down
Oui,
to
c'est
say,
très
are
important,
we
c'est un
doing
droit le
things the
plus
right way?
fondamental
It's essential
d'avoir
that the
un
most
accès
fundamental
public sur
rights,
réserve à de l'eau potable sûre et fraîche
public access
pour
to
les résidents.
fresh water,
Mais est-ce que
be
l'approche se fait de
provided.
la bonne façon?
But are we doing
Ce
the
qu'on a pu
right,
voir au
have we
cours
got
de
the right
6 mois où
method?
évidemment
And what we've been able to
la
see
COVID a explosé,
in these last
c'est qu'il y
months
avait
when
des
we've
demandes,
had COVID
des revendications fort pertinentes en ce
is
qui a
that
trait
there are
de
truly
à
relevant
l'entretien
claims with regard to
d'une
maintenance
infrastructure clé d'une
of
communauté, c'est-à-dire
the
les usines en eau
community's
potable,
key infrastructure,
l'approvisionnement dans
that
les
is the water
résidences
supply,
de cette même eau.
drinking water
Et
supplies.
des vrais challenges en ce qui a trait à
There
la
are also
formule qui
real
était proposée.
challenges with
Et pour
regard to the
rappeler
formula
ceux
that was
qui sont
being
peut-être plus intéressés, c'est que le
proposed.
gouvernement fédéral donnait 80%
The
du
federal
financement
government
de l'entretien
provided
et
80%
la communauté
funding
elle-même devait donner
for
20%. Alors,
maintenance,
les fonds n'étaient pas
and the
nécessairement à l'appui. Et ce à
communities
quoi on
had to
assistait,
provide
c'était
20%.
le risque que pouvait poser
This
toute
funding
cette
formula didn't
dynamique
really reflect the risk
le risque d'avoir un avis
involved.
d'ébullition à court terme.
That
et
is the
ensuite,
risk of
à long
having a
terme.
short-term
Alors,
water
ce qu'on a fait,
advisory,
et c'est
well, water
reflété dans
advisory, and a long-term one too.
l'énoncé fiscal d'automne, c'est qu'on a annoncé
What we did
1,5
in our
milliard de dollars pour
economic
toutes les
update in the
communautés avec
fall
des
was to announce
approvisionnements publics
$1.5
sur
billion
réserve pour régler le problème,
for
c'est-à-dire d'aller à 100%. Et en termes de
Indigenous
chiffres,
First
ce
Nations
que ça
to
fait à
solve these
comparer avec le
problems.
financement qui se faisait, par exemple, en 2015-2016,
Now, what that
ça
means
va être
compared
de
to what was
doubler
being done in the past,
cet
in
argent-là pour
2015,
les communautés
2016,
pour
first
assurer
of all,
la
it
pérennité de
doubles the money
l'infrastructure.
for First
La
Nations for
vérificatrice
that
générale a
infrastructure.
souligné,
The
et
Auditor
évidemment
General
avec cause, qu'il y avait un
emphasized,
certain nombre
with reason, that there were
d'avis d'ébullition à long terme
a certain number of long-term boiled water
qui allaient au-delà de 10
advisories,
ans.
however,
Eh
that
bien,
needed
à
to
peu
be
près la moitié
lifted.
de ces
About half
avis
of these
ont de l'eau
advisories,
sûre et propre qui fonctionne maintenant grâce à
well, they've been
l'investissement de
lifted.
notre
There is now
gouvernement. Mais ce qui manque,
a clean,
c'est
reliable
l'assurance du
source of
gouvernement
drinking water,
fédéral,
thanks
le
to this money.
partenariat du gouvernement fédéral
However,
quant
what's
à
missing
cet investissement dans le maintien de l'opération de
is
l'actif,
the investments with regard
c'est-à-dire
to
l'usine en tant que
maintaining
telle,
these assets,
et le
the
personnel.
water
Et là,
treatment
grâce à
plant
l'énoncé
and the staff
fiscal
that
d'automne,
runs them.
on est là pour appuyer les communautés et ça à long terme.
Thanks to the
Alors,
fall economic
je l'ai
update, we are
souligné
now here to
dans mes
support them
propos
for the long term.
en introduction, mais cet argent-là de
I stated
1,5
this in
milliard
my
de dollars a
introduction,
transformé
but
la
this
façon dont
$1.5 billion
on approche les
has
communautés
changed the way
et
we
notre
approach the
engagement,
communities. It's
c'est-à-dire
changed our commitment,
le soutien du gouvernement fédéral à cet effet-là. Donc,
and
ça
it's
va avoir
changed the
pour
federal
effet de
government's
vraiment
support.
transformer la donne et d'avoir une
This will
approche
truly
d'ensemble
change
quant
the way things
à
work
notre objectif de lever
and
ces
will
avis.
help us reach our goal of lifting these advisories.
Parfait. En
Follow-up
suivi,
question.
il y a non seulement la question du
There's also
80%, mais aussi la manière,
there's
la
not just the
formule qui permet de
80-20
déterminer
formula,
quels sont les coûts
but the way of
de fonctionnement
determining
et d'entretien.
costs
Une formule qui
of
date des années
operations
80,
and
comme le
maintenance.
souligne la vérificatrice générale. Est-ce que vous avez une date ou un échéancier clair
Do you have an idea
pour que les communautés sachent
a
à quel
date
moment une nouvelle
when
formule peut-être plus
new
adéquate
adequate,
va
a better
entrer?
rather funding formula will be
Ben,
provided?
il
Answer.
va y avoir des nouvelles à suivre. Je
Well, there
vais
will
devoir
be
faire le
news.
suivi avec vous et ça sera peut-être
Stay posted.
l'objet d'un brefage technique.
There will
Parce que c'est
perhaps
très
be a
important comme
technical
concept.
briefing
En termes de
when we make
soutien fiscal,
when we update
je
you.
vous ai dit que dans l'année fiscale 2020-2021, ça va représenter le
The
double. Mais là,
2021
rendu en
tax year will
en
be
2024-2025, ça va être à peu près
see
4
the
fois.
amount
Donc,
doubled,
c'est
but
tout un appui qui va être porté aux
later it will
communautés
be
de façon
quadrupled.
récurrente pour leur
So
accompagner
this
dans le
is
processus. Mais
long-term
je suis évidemment
funding
très ouvert
for
à
the
réexaminer la
communities,
formule
but of
parce
course
que
I'm perfectly
évidemment, ça a
open
été
to
souligné hier en point de presse.
reviewing the
Une personne
funding
qui
formula.
travaille, une personne très expérimentée qui fait la fierté de sa communauté, qui travaille dans sa
These First
communauté,
Nations
peut
have
en faire bien plus
people
en
who are
dehors de la
the
communauté.
pride of their
Et en dehors de la
community,
communauté, on s'entend que c'est
qualified
des communautés très
operators,
souvent non autochtones, alors c'est pas juste.
and often they can earn more money
Merci,
outside of
Alexis.
their community.
Prochaine
That's not
question, s'il
fair.
vous plaît.
Next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Brett Forrester de APTN News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi, my question is for Minister Miller as well. The Auditor General says First Nations will not have reliable clean water access until several things happen: policy reform, updated 30-year-old funding formulas, new federal legislation, and concrete long-term solutions. So my question is, when will Ottawa accomplish all these things?
Well, thank you, Brett. I think what we need to distinguish is the situation we found ourselves in 2015 with a massive undercapitalization in infrastructure and critical infrastructure in Indigenous communities, and the situation we find ourselves now, which admittedly is not perfect. What we've seen is close to 100 lifting of long-term water advisories due to the persistent engagement that we've had with communities that now have, and some it's been an issue of 18, 20 years that they haven't had it. They do have clean water. The issues you raise are very important because that's something that I and my team heard repeatedly throughout the 15 months that I've been Minister of Indigenous Services. Is they want us in there for the long run. And the question I kept hearing is, where are you going to be after March 2021? Are you just going to go away and these things will slip to long term, rather they're short term and then to long term? And the work that we did throughout the fall to identify where we need to change things fell squarely in that discussion around O&M, which I get makes a lot of people's eyes glaze over, but that we're talking about fairness to water operators on reserve that could get more off reserve in a non-Indigenous community. We're talking about training of the best and brightest to work in state-of-the-art plants. We're talking about a formula, like you said, it was outdated. The federal government was only providing 80% of the funding, leaving the 20% up to the community. Not all communities can do that. So we're moving to 100%. And as I told your colleague in French, the funding that we announced in the fall economic statement of $1.5 billion works on some of the acceleration measures that we need to do throughout COVID, because we have in fact lost the construction season. But I believe most importantly, really transforms the way we approach providing clean water into Indigenous communities. And that is namely in the area of operations and maintenance, which will double the amounts that we had going into communities in 2015, 2016, in 2020, 2021. So right now, and then by 2024, 2025, we'll be close to 4 times what we had going into communities. So that will transform the relationship, will allow for repairs, maintenance, operations of key assets within communities. And we know that premature aging occurs when you can't operate the asset. It's great to have a state-of-the-art treatment plant in a community that is the pride of the community, but you have to have people that operate in it, are trained, and can get proper pay for equal work, and that's just a matter of fairness. And so the conclusion of the Auditor General is a very pertinent one. It's one that I and my team saw going into the pandemic, where I do have some work to do and some thinking to wrap, I think, our collective brains around is legislative framework. You'll recall, because you've covered these issues, that the current federal framework was one that was put in by the Conservative government. It was widely decried by First Nations. It's been called the Harper Hangover. It is called a colonialist instrument. So I would say that we need to rethink the framework with which we approach safe water and clean water on reserve to one that really reflects our relationship of nation to nation. So that will take some engagement and some thinking. And certainly, as we know, that Ottawa imposed solutions do not work. And that's one point in the Auditor General's report that I want to do some further thinking on.
Brett, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you for that fulsome answer. You know, in your introduction, you said, despite the challenges, we're confident we're on the right path. But to me, the audit is saying that Canada needs to immediately do several things and reform several things that haven't been done. As noted, the auditor is calling for a new regulatory regime to be put in place, and that hasn't been done in 15 years, despite several audits. So I suppose I would just repose the question that when is a reasonable timeline for these reforms to be accomplished?
Well, like I said at the end of the previous question that I answered, Brett, we really want to examine with First Nations what that approach is. We have within Indigenous Services Canada a pretty robust monitoring system and engagement system with First Nations that allows the type of feedback to track waterborne illness, to engage. It's a number of close to 100 dedicated operators across the country that work with First Nations to get data to have constant monitoring and feedback and engagement. What we've seen throughout the pandemic is when we do engage and when we have proper engagement with communities, there are better outcomes. And I think that it would be true with water as well. So whether that is embodied through an enhanced legislative framework from Ottawa, or one that is co-developed and worked with through First Nations, and including the same process on a number of subjects that we've engaged on, self-determination, water authorities that can work faster or on the ground or First Nations led. Those are things that I want to examine. I have a very, very specific goal of ensuring that clean water gets in communities. We have to make sure that it's being done in the right way. And I would put to you that we are close to getting there. We are on a good track, but it is part of the overall approach of ensuring that First Nations have access to safe water.
Thanks, Brett. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Ryan Jones from CBC News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Hi there. My question is also for Minister Miller, a bit of a follow-up. So as the previous reporter mentioned, one of the issues that the AG identified was the lack of a regulatory regime. So I guess my question is, how is that acceptable, and what are the plans, if any, to set one up to ensure that the rights of the First Nations people to clean drinking water are enshrined in law?
Our first priority is to ensure that First Nations have access to clean and safe drinking water. How we do that and how we embody that and capture that as part of a federal commitment is equally important. We know that the previous regime didn't work, was widely decried. We're currently working with the Assembly of First Nations specifically on how that framework would look like. But it is something that they'll have to be a little wider than AFN, and working with regional water authorities. This summer, for example, I would note that a regional water authority was launched, First Nations led, in the Atlantic regions, and we're willing to sponsor and participate in many more. We know that First Nations-led solutions lead to better outcomes. It isn't simply a matter of policy that just leads to better outcomes. And so that's something and a path that we want to walk with First Nations. I can't provide you with a timeline. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't reflect the work that needs to be done and the engagement that I have to hear back from communities that are affected.
Ryan, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I think I'll switch over to Minister Alghabra. You did mention that Transport Canada has begun to, or has addressed many of the recommendations in the previous 2013 audit, but I mean, clearly there's much more progress that needs to be done, according to the Auditor General, So I guess just my question, why after so many years is there still so much to do on rail safety?
Thank you, Ryan. Look, as I said earlier, safety for rail passengers and rail traffic is my #1 priority. And the Auditor General acknowledges in the report that important and significant progress has been made since the 2013 audit. We've increased the number of inspectors by 50%. We've increased the number of inspections to an average 35,000 a year. We've changed the type of inspection from random to risk-based analysis. We've added extra regulations where we required companies to install voice and video recorders. We've added, introduced measures for fatigue management. We've added measures to improve employee safety in yard operations. We've added restrictions on speed for trains that are carrying dangerous goods. So, but undoubtedly, safety is a continuous improvement project. I welcome the Auditor General's report, where she's asking us to go further, and I and the department are committed to implementing those recommendations.
Thank you, Ryan. Operator, next question, please.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press *1 if you have a question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 pour toute question. The next question is from, la prochaine question est de Lina Dib de la Presse canadienne. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Presse canadienne.
Yes, Minister Alghabra, I want to go on with that topic you just touched. So, I mean, the minister before you kept saying to us the same thing, safety, the rail safety is my #1 priority. And still, the Lac Mégantic tragedy that was in 2013, and still the AG today is saying you're not doing enough. And actually she's saying that you've done a lot of things, that there's a lot of movement, but you have no way of assessing if all these things you're doing are actually having an impact on safety. So what is your answer to that criticism from the AG?
Thank you for the question. And let me, since you raised Lac Mégantic. I join all Canadians in remembering and honoring those who've been affected by this. On first week of my job, my predecessor, Minister Garneau, had left me a spike from the track of Lac Mégantic to remind me of the responsibility that rests upon my shoulders and the departments for safety consideration. Look, what the Auditor General is asking us to add extra layers of safety auditing, and we welcome that. We actually looked at other jurisdictions in the world that are doing what she's asking for, and we couldn't find an example. But having said that, we think it's a good idea, and we think we have started working already on reaching out to our stakeholders, to our partners, to implement these recommendations.
So what exactly do you mean that you looked elsewhere and nobody is doing this? Like no other country does actually have a way of assessing if their safety measures are having an impact?
Yeah, so this is an added layer on top of all the inspections and audits and system management and safety system managements that are audited, is a way for us to go back and measure the actual impact. So the way we've been measuring safety is through traditional measurements of accidents every year per capita or per passengers or per cargo. What is being suggested is, can we measure other type of systemic ways where these new systems that we've implemented is actually adding a significant impact? And based on that, we've looked at other jurisdictions, and we haven't been able to find one yet. But having said that, I'm not saying that it's a bad idea. I think it's actually a good idea. And there's nothing stopping us from being the first in the world to do that, and we are committed to doing it.
Thank you, Lena. This concludes today's press conference. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui. Merci.